Now to a pair of disturbing trends when it comes to immigration enforcement, and both appear to go much further than President Trump campaigned for or that the public may be aware of. The first is an increasingly frequent policy of ICE separating undocumented immigrant parents from their children, often without any reason given or any way for families to reunite and reconnect. Homeland Security claims such harsh treatment will deter more families from crossing the border. The families and their advocates say it's just punitive. The other policy is on who gets deported. During the campaign, President Trump insisted only the worst of the worst, his bad hombres, would be targeted by ICE, undocumented immigrants with serious criminal histories. But now, just 14 months into the Trump administration, ICE appears to be detaining any and all undocumented immigrants, even those whose only crime is crossing into the country illegally, a far cry from how the immigration crackdown was first sold. Now, to learn more about this trend and the impact it's having on our immigrant neighbors, I sat down this week with Karin and Carola Otero Bracco, both with the immigrant advocacy group Neighbors Link.
The new administration has expanded, notwithstanding their rhetoric, which keeps being focused on criminal deportations. The reality is they're deporting everybody, and a lot of the people they're deporting are what I would call low-hanging fruit, and that means law-abiding people in this country who may have an immigration violation, but they have U.S. citizen children here, they're paying taxes, they're paying into Social Security, but they're easy to pick up. And those people are deported, but those people are criminalized. They're characterized as criminals when they're not. They're our neighbors. They're people who go to our churches.
Carola, I'm surprised how little attention this seems to be getting. I'm curious your thought as to why and how you think the wider public would react if they knew that ICE was rounding up and deporting people whose only crime is being here in an undocumented fashion.
Well, I think when we talk about immigrants and you hear all this rhetoric about immigrants being criminals, there's an attempt there to completely dehumanize a whole community of people. But what happens is that a particular congregation suddenly experiences that a person within that congregation has now suddenly been picked up and is going to be deported. And then you see that whole congregation suddenly start to understand, although they might have already had a sense, but really understand what it means that here's a community member that's a father that's been living here for decades, that has been contributing to our economy and to their community and is a loving, wonderful person. And so now suddenly that person's going to get deported. And that's the story that starts to help to humanize the situation.
We've heard stories about immigrants being afraid to go to court hearings or not wanting to contact the police because they're afraid that they'll get caught.
Absolutely.
But now that it's not just criminals, I mean, not people who have committed serious crimes, it's anybody. I got to think that's got to have an extraordinarily chilling effect.
Absolutely. People are afraid to interact with any government official. They're afraid of interacting with the folks at their children's school, and their children are terrified. I think it's really important to remember the impact on all children, not just children coming across the border, but children who are in our communities, who are the friends of our children. They're terrified that they're going to come home and their parents won't be there.
So guys, there's two parts to this that I'm equally concerned about and frankly equally steamed about. One is the policies themselves. But the other part of it is the fact that this is not the way this was sold to the American public, particularly during the 2016 campaign. I don't think the public would have gone for it if it had been, well, we're going to kick every undocumented immigrant out of the country. And I'm surprised this hasn't gotten a little more traction. I'm curious for your thoughts. I'm going to start with Bill.
Yeah, okay, the children thing, I can't stand that, the dividing the families, that seems ridiculous.
I don't see any upside to it.
But here's why the lack of clarity out of Washington is so crazy. The ICE officers, at the end of the day, if we're being honest, are doing their jobs. It's their jobs to take people who are here unlawfully and to lock them up. That's their jobs. It's not written into the law, the caveats. And, you know, you could argue over whether that should happen or not, but they're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
I'd like to argue whether that should happen or not. The problem is we haven't had that conversation as a country.
We've been talking about it for years, but Washington won't clarify.
We haven't.
There is always enforcement discretion. It's for cops let you do. They don't stop you if you do 57 miles an hour on a 55.
It's not written. Yeah.
Right, and the same is true for immigration stuff. There was something of a consensus, and I think there still is, that if you're dealing with an accused violent criminal, then regular police, the FBI, and ICE officers can be helpful in apprehending and
I agree with that policy. The question is can you blame ICE for doing its job?
It's not doing its job.
It's Washington's not clear on policy.
There is enforcement discretion. I don't know what the problem. Do you stop everybody who's drinking a beer on the street, or do you let some people go? The cops understand that good law enforcement is also a matter of judgment, not a matter of rote
I understand
enforcement.
that. I don't disagree with you. It's just
Well, and here's another part that bothers me. And Scott, I think this is why this is all sort of happening quietly. Because I think a lot more of the public would object to it if they knew that it wasn't the worst of the worst. It wasn't Trump's bad hombres who are going to be deported. It's anybody. It's anybody who's in the country illegally. I don't think the public would stand for it.
Well, and this report, I mean, as you point out, is not really very much public. And this may depend on where you are in the country and how it's doing. And it may depend, on the discretion going one way or the other, depending on who the officers in that particular group are. I mean, there is a problem with dealing with illegals, undocumented folks here. And that's not an easy subject. But I will say this about it. I know firsthand that children in schools are absolutely terrified. And to that point, they are terrified both on the DACA issue and on this very issue of whether people are going to come into their schools or into their homes. They are terrified. And I can tell you from East Ramapo School District, where my wife works, that is the underlying feeling as these children try to go to learn. And that's I think it's a real societal ill.
I saw a report from CNN, and I think we have a grab of it, that religious institutions, particularly in California, particularly Jewish synagogues, members are taking undocumented immigrants into their homes and hiding them from ICE, which is basically paying it forward because there were a lot of Europeans during the Second World War who did that for Jewish families during the Holocaust. And Richard, that's where we are. We have American families hiding undocumented immigrants because of what may happen to them.
Which is a courageous thing for many people to do. I wish everyone would go easy on the metaphors.
I'm not making the metaphor.
This is not the Holocaust.
I'm not saying it is.
But that being said, the American people understand that there's a difference between resolving the legal status of 12 million people and dealing with criminals and then dealing with children.
I was just going to say the country is tearing itself apart. Communities are tearing themselves apart because Washington, and it's been both Democrats and Republicans, refuse to do their job and to come up with clear policy, and it's just it's just ripping us up, and it's making kids freak out in classrooms, and it's dividing families apparently.
Can't have a clear policy if we're not going to debate it publicly and openly for everybody. All right, up next, yet another cabinet shakeup for President Trump. We've got the details next.